History is full of stories we've heard a thousand times. Napoleon was extremely short. Vikings wore horned helmets. People in the Middle Ages thought the earth was flat. But what if many of these facts are actually myths? What if history isn't exactly how we were taught? Today, we're uncovering the hidden truths behind some of the world's most famous historical myths. Stories repeated for generations until they became accepted as reality. Welcome to BlastOPast, where the past explodes back to life. One of history's most famous insults is calling someone Napoleon-sized. The image of Napoleon Bonaparte as a tiny, angry dictator became deeply embedded in pop culture. But here's the truth: Napoleon wasn't unusually short for his time. In fact, historians estimate he was around 5'6" or 5'7" tall, average height for a Frenchman in the early 1800s. So, where did the myth came from? Partly because of confusion between French and British measuring systems, and partly because British propaganda exaggerated his appearance to make him look weaker and more ridiculous. Political cartoons constantly portrayed him as tiny and childish. Over time, the image stuck. This shows something powerful. Repeat a story enough times, and eventually people stop questioning it. When most people imagine Vikings, they picture giant warriors wearing horned helmets. Movies, cartoons, video games, the image is everywhere. But historians have found almost no evidence that real Vikings actually wore horned helmets in battle. Why? Because horns would have made combat impractical and dangerous. They could easily get caught during fighting. This myth became popular in the 19th century when costume designers for opera wanted Vikings to look more dramatic and intimidating, and the design became iconic. The real Vikings were already terrifying enough without fantasy fashion. This myth reminds us that entertainment often shapes history more than facts do. A lot of people believe that before Christopher Columbus, everyone thought the earth was flat. But educated people in medieval Europe already knew the earth was round. Ancient Greek scholars had even calculated Earth's circumference centuries earlier. So, why does the myth exist? Because later writers simplified history into a dramatic story. Brave explorer proves everyone wrong. It sounds exciting, but reality is usually more complicated. In fact, Columbus's real disagreement with scholars wasn't about Earth being round, it was about how big the Earth was, and ironically, Columbus badly underestimated the planet's size. History often gets rewritten into simpler stories because simple stories are easier to remember. One of the most repeated facts in the world is this: the Great Wall of China is the only man made structure visible from space. Sounds impressive, but astronauts have repeatedly explained that this is mostly false. The wall is difficult to see with the naked eye from low Earth orbit without special conditions. Many cities, roads, airports, and lights are actually easier to spot from space. So, how did this myth spread? Because people loved the symbolism. The Great Wall was already one of humanity's greatest engineering achievements. Saying it could be seen from space made it sound even more legendary. Sometimes myths survive because they feel poetic. even when they aren't scientifically accurate. Movies often show medieval witches being burned at the stake everywhere across Europe, but the truth is more complicated. Different regions use different punishments. Some accused witches were imprisoned, some were executed in other ways, some were released entirely, and many witch trials happened during periods of fear, political instability, and mass paranoia. The terrifying part is this: ordinary people were often accused based on rumors, jealousy, or social tension. History shows how dangerous fear and misinformation can become when societies stop questioning accusations. The witch trials weren't just about superstition, they were about power, panic, and human psychology. Thanks to fiction, especially pirate stories and movies, people imagine pirates constantly burying treasure chests on remote islands, but in reality, most pirates spent stolen wealth quickly: food, alcohol, weapons, supplies. Pirates lived dangerously and often expected short lives. There's very little historical evidence that burying treasure was common. The idea became famous largely because of adventure novels like Treasure Island. Fiction shaped our imagination so strongly that people started confusing stories with reality. The story of the Trojan horse is legendary. Greek soldiers hiding inside a giant wooden horse to enter the city of Troy. But historians still debate whether the horse was literal, symbolic, or partly fictional. Some theories suggest it represented a siege machine, it symbolized an earthquake, or it was poetic storytelling added later. Ancient history often mixed facts with mythology, and over centuries, stories evolved dramatically as they were retold. That's one of the biggest challenges historians face: separating historical truth from legendary storytelling. One hidden truth behind many myths is this: history is influenced by power, victorious nations, political leaders, religious institutions. The people controlling narratives often shape how future generations remember events. That doesn't mean all history is fake, but it does mean history can be biased. Some people become heroes, others become villains, sometimes unfairly. That's why historians constantly re examine old histories using new evidence, archaeology, and research. The past is not always fixed. Our understanding of it keeps evolving. You might wonder, okay, but why do these myths matter? Because myths shape how societies think. They influence education, culture, politics, national identity. And sometimes myths are harmless fun, but other times they distort reality. Learning the truth about history teaches critical thinking. It reminds us to question popular narratives instead of blindly accepting them. Because if myths can survive for centuries, imagine how easily misinformation spreads today through social media and the internet. History doesn't just teach us about the past, it teaches us how humans think. So, next time you hear a famous historical fact, pause for a second, because history is often more complicated, more surprising, and far more human than the myths we grow up hearing. This is BlastOPast, where forgotten truths return from history's shadows.